Welcome to Mike's Retro Curiosities, where we explore the wonderful world of retro games. Today we're taking a look at Actraiser. Actraiser was released for the Super Nintendo in 1990, making it one of the first games released for that system. This was the first title developed by Quintet. Quintet was owned by Enix, but largely consisted of former Falcom employees. They didn't last very long, but pretty much all of their games were very unique, and many of them would become cult classics. This was especially true of the games that they released during the Super Nintendo era, and Actraiser is no exception. What made this game unique was that it combined two different genres, the God game and the side-scrolling action game. The God game was actually very new at the time. The original Populous had only been released about a year prior, and so Actraiser is kind of one of the first examples of this genre. The story has players taking on the role of God, who wakes up from a millennia-long sleep to find that Satan has taken over the surface world, and so you as God have to set things right. This was changed a bit in the North American version to remove any references to real-life religions in accordance with Nintendo of America's guidelines at the time. For example, God is only ever referred to as the Master in this game, but it's fairly easy to read between the lines. The game switches between two primary modes of play. The first is a traditional action platformer, somewhat reminiscent of the Castlevania series. There is also a god game / city builder where players perform various divine acts to help their people flourish. This involves things such as using lightning to remove obstacles or summoning rain to help crops grow. At the same time, you also have to control a cherub to fight off various monsters who will try to harm your people. On occasion, you will also be petitioned by worshippers to perform certain tasks. The basic goal of the God Game segments is to help civilization grow and flourish, and to guide the people so that they seal up the portal that the demons are coming out of, doing which unlocks the next action stage. It's beneficial to do more than just the bare minimum in the God Game sections, since expanding civilization and increasing the population allows you to unlock new spells and a larger health bar for the action sections. In fact, later in the game, when the player unlocks more advanced structures for their worshippers, it's actually a good idea to go back to earlier god stages in order to help their civilization expand even further in those earlier areas. Hilariously, this often involves burning down people's houses in order to force them to upgrade to the improved structures. By the time of Actraiser's release, genre blending was nothing new in gaming. However, such attempts almost never work out, as they oftentimes leave the game feeling thinly spread and unfocused. Rather than focusing in on one style of gameplay and doing that extremely well, most of these sorts of games utilize multiple styles of play that are all done mediocre at best, if not outright terrible at worst. And at first glance, this appears to be the case with Actraiser. Taken in isolation, the two game modes in this title are rather shallow and lacking compared to other games from their genre. The Sim stages are very basic when compared to, say, the likes of SimCity. The action stages are able to stand a bit better on their own, but even still are nowhere near as well designed as, say, Castlevania. Yet, somehow, someway, Quintet makes it work, and this is a game that's far greater than the sum of its parts. Actraiser is crafted in such a way that each mode enforces the other rather than detracting from it. The whole thing is also quite nicely tied together through its themes and story. Without wishing to spoil anything, Actraiser is kind of one of the first games, at least that I'm aware of, to evoke bittersweet emotions from players, especially in the ending. Many of the themes introduced in this game would actually go on to be further expanded in some of Quintet's later titles. Graphically, the game looks solid for its time and is still rather appealing. Though, as was often the case with a lot of early Super Nintendo games, Actraiser does tend to overuse the system's Mode 7 capabilities. The soundtrack, courtesy of the legendary Yuzo Koshiro, is absolutely fantastic. The game utilizes a pseudo-orchestra and classical sound that was unlike anything heard on a home console before. And I maintain that Fillmore is quite possibly the greatest Stage 1 music ever in a game, even to this day. The music in Actraiser is so good that even Nobuo Uematsu of Final Fantasy fame would compliment it, and would state that he felt that the music that he wrote for Final Fantasy IV didn't measure up to it. Overall, this is a great game in spite of a few flaws. The gameplay could have definitely have been more in-depth, not to mention I feel that the difficulty curve isn't quite as smooth as I would have liked it. Nonetheless, this game succeeded in what it set out to do. It's also an early example of gaming's artistic potential, particularly in the ability to provoke complex emotions from players. One aspect of this game that I should probably mention, as it tripped me up when I first played it, is that it's just about the only Super Nintendo game, at least that I'm aware of, that requires you to hold down the reset button while you're turning the power off, or else you risk losing your saves. This was fairly common among games that utilize save features on the NES, but by the time we reached the Super Nintendo, it had pretty much gone extinct. The fact that you had to do this really took me by surprise, and I initially thought that there was something wrong with it. As far as various ways to play Actraiser, there's of course the Super Nintendo version here. It was later brought over to the Wii Virtual Console, although that version has obviously been delisted. There was also a remake slash remaster called Actraiser Renaissance, which is probably the easiest way to play it on modern consoles today. That being said, I've been rather hesitant to try that one. I'm really just not a fan of what they did with the graphics and some of the tweaks to the gameplay. Like, I'm sure it's fine for most people, but as for me, I think I'll stick with the original. There was a sequel to this game called Actraiser 2. Unfortunately, it seems that Quintet heard that players didn't like the God Game segments, and so Actraiser 2 was a pure action affair. They also made it much harder than the original. As a result, the sequel isn't considered to be anywhere near as good as the original. I've heard it's not half bad in spite of those issues, so I'd be willing to give it a try sometime. But that'll be it for today. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. This episode is sponsored by M&M Games, and I will see you guys next time.